Welcome to a video series that I've been working on for quite a while now called Let's Fear Japanese Horror, a journey through literature, cinema, and video games. As the title suggests, I will take you on a trip across 3 forms of media and introduce some of the various milestones of Japanese horror that can be found along the way. We will begin with ancient Japanese literature, eventually switch to Japanese cinema, and go all the way up to modern Japanese video games. Of course, horror comes in many different shapes and colors, so I have narrowed it down somewhat by focusing on horror that is uncanny, because that's the kind of horror that has always fascinated me the most. But it certainly won't be limited to that. In a way, you could think of this video series as a great expedition into the dark forest of Japanese horror, where we will try to illuminate many fascinating areas and at times shine a particularly bright light onto the uncanny. On our way through all this, we will examine questions such as: what is the earliest record in Japanese literature that contains something we might categorize as horror? Are there perhaps certain recurring themes that continue or evolve across several periods? What could be the social and historical backgrounds for some of those themes? For example, did you know that the famous motif of female vengeful spirits with long black hair dates back a lot further than J-horror cinema? Well, these are the kind of questions that will be explored while following the development of Japanese horror as it makes its way throughout literature, cinema, and video games. And at the end of this broad journey, we will take the Japanese video game Silent Hill 2 and thoroughly analyze it while looking back on some of the previous findings. Now, with this outline in mind, let me go into a bit more detail about the general structure and the origin of this video series. First of all, the content of this series will roughly be based on my graduation thesis that I wrote in 2009-2010 at the University of Trier in Germany. The original thesis was written in German and was titled Das Unheimliche in Japan, which is basically German for the uncanny in Japan. So actually back then the uncanny was the sole focus of my graduation thesis. But while I started translating it into English, I began researching additional topics and delved a lot more into the general development of Japanese horror, which is why this has become a series about Japanese horror with a special focus on the uncanny. Now that means that the uncanny will play a major role in this series, and so we will need to properly define the term itself. Therefore, at the very beginning of the series, we will take a close look at the term uncanny. Well, to be more precise, we will actually examine the German term unheimlich, since the original thesis was also written in German and examined that term back then. But don't worry, everything will be explained in English, and I will even add a brief look at the English equivalent uncanny in the respective video. Thereafter, we will begin the above-mentioned exploration of horror in Japan across 3 forms of media, which will obviously be broken down into 3 large chapters. This is followed by the Silent Hill 2 analysis and a final conclusion. Well then, I think this gives you a good summary of what to expect in the upcoming videos. There are just 2 more points I wanted to mention real quick. First of all, I want to stress that I do not claim that any of these chapters will be exhaustive. After all, even just one of the above-mentioned topics could keep a diligent scholar busy for years if they wanted to cover absolutely everything there is, but the research for my graduation thesis back then had to be done within the scope of 1 year and had to fit onto about 100 pages, so naturally there were limits to how much time I could dedicate to each of my subtopics and how much content I could pack them with. Furthermore, I also do not claim that the conclusions I draw from my findings are the only correct ones to draw. In other words, anyone is absolutely welcome to share their own expertise or thoughts on each and every video, maybe even supplement my findings with their own or add whatever they think might be noteworthy and hasn't been mentioned by me. I'm always happy about comments. And that concludes this video. I hope to see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.